I've got a real problem with Paul Pogba. No, not a weird Graham Souness problem, an actual one. Because my question is this. What is a Pogba? What is Paul Pogba? Is he this world-class, excellent, elite player who just needs the right support network and ecosystem in order to properly flourish and to properly get the best out of him? Or does he flatter to deceive? Is he overrated? Is he overhyped? And already that poses a question because that is a genuine debate. And at this stage in his career, considering the promise he had, we really shouldn't be asking whether he is a great player or whether he's overrated. Side note, before we move on to Pogba, it's quite funny that United lost him on a free, signed him for a world record amount, lose him on a free. Starting with the Juventus Paul Pogba, who was successful in Serie A, was in his early 20s and he was being touted as the next big thing in football. At Juventus, he played in basically every single area of the centre of midfield, primarily in the box-to-box role, but he also was able to play more defensive, and even in his last season, and especially, he played in a much more advanced and offensive role. So he thrived and he succeeded in a number of roles at Juventus, also in a number of different formations throughout that time period. Juventus played a back three and they played a back five. And at that period in time, there was one Yaya Toure who was taking the central midfield world by storm, and it was quite easy to make the comparisons at the time between Pogba and Toure. The future was bright for Pogba. He was in his early 20s. He won 4 back-to-back Serie A titles with Juventus, and he even won the Golden Boy award. Players like Sergio Aguero, for example, have won that award. He even helped Juventus to a Champions League final in addition to all those Serie A wins. And in addition to the Yaya Toure comparisons, whilst not a perfect comparison, he was also being compared at the time to Kevin De Bruyne. And the main reason why he was being compared to De Bruyne at that time was because they were a similar age profile. De Bruyne just 1 or 2 years Pogba's senior, but also in the summer in which KDB moved to Manchester City, there was also talk about Pogba also joining Manchester City that same window. But a lot of people were saying that Pogba was, at that moment in time, a much better player than De Bruyne. It was all going very well at Juventus, but then Pogba left for United, and in 6 seasons at United, I think it's fair enough to say that he has flopped. And that leads me to the point of this video, because my question is, what happened? Because at Juventus, as I've just said, he was being compared to Yaya Toure. By his Juventus teammates, he was being compared to Zinedine Zidane. Due to the City connection, he was being compared to Kevin De Bruyne. And it's just not happened for him. We're going to start with his time at Juventus, and this might be a potential hot take, but I don't care, I'm going to say it. I think his time at Juventus was heavily, heavily overhyped. Was he good at Juventus? Did he succeed at Juventus? Did he win a lot with Juventus? Yes, he even helped them get to a Champions League final. I'm not saying he was a bad player at Juventus at all, but the way people go on about Pogba's time at Juventus, you think he was like the second coming of Christ or something. He was a good player, yeah. Yeah, he was good, he was fine. But he wasn't like this elite world-class player. He was probably a world-class talent, but in terms of actual output at that moment in time, no, not necessarily. I'm going to caveat it. Juventus had won Serie A the season before Pogba had joined, and they'd go on to win it 9 times in a row, and Pogba was present for 4 of those. And this is the goalkeeper, defence, and midfield the season before Pogba joined. In fact, I've made a note of this, just so I don't get this wrong, but this was the goalkeeper, defence, and midfield that Juventus had when they won Serie A before Pogba joined. You had Buffon, Barzagli, Chiellini, Bonucci, Lichtsteiner, Marchisio, Pirlo, and Vidal. And this was the goalkeeper, defence, and midfield which won Serie A in Pogba's last season with Juventus. Buffon, Barzagli, Chiellini, Bonucci, Lichtsteiner, Marchisio, Evra, and obviously Pogba. So of the whole goalkeeper, defence, midfield situation from Juventus' first Serie A win to the final Serie A win with Pogba, their 5th in a row at that moment in time, 6 of those players were the same. Buffon, Barzagli, Chiellini, Bonucci, Lichtsteiner, and Marchisio. The point I'm trying to make there is that the team was already excellent, and it was, in respect to the positions which affect Pogba the most, the defence and midfield, it was largely the same. I don't know what percentage of those league title wins you can properly apportion to Pogba. Also, in his first season, he started less than half the league games, so he wasn't exactly essential that year. And he obviously did go on to become a regular starter for Juve in that midfield, but he only had more than 30 league appearances in 2 of his seasons at Juve. I think it wouldn't be incorrect to say that Juventus would have won those Serie A titles and won them just as comfortably as they did, even without Pogba. Because this was when Juventus dominated Serie A. In fact, the closest anyone got to Juventus whilst Pogba was at Juventus was in 2016, and that was Napoli, and that was when they came 9 points behind Juventus. So Juventus were never really in danger of losing their Serie A crown. And in that season, Napoli only managed to amass 82 points. You'd have to go back to 2006 for a time when a Serie A winner got less than 82 points. Moreover, and I think this is even a stronger point, after Pogba left United, if he was so essential, if he was so good for Juventus, wouldn't there have been even a slight drop-off in terms of Juventus's title domination? Well, that's not what happened. They won a further 4 in a row after Pogba left. He was good in Italy. I even saw him play live at the Etihad when Juventus beat City. City still topped that group somehow, despite losing twice to Juventus. But I saw him live for Juventus, and yeah, he was good. He wasn't an unbelievable world-class player in Italy, and it wasn't unbelievable world-class performances he was putting in the Champions League. That being said, he did nevertheless succeed with Juventus, and he generally does well with France. He obviously reached the finals of the Euros and then won the World Cup with France. So what's happening here? He can play well for France, he played well enough for Juventus, but he flopped, struggled, I'd say failed at United. So what was present at Juventus, what is present at France, what isn't present at Manchester United? Let's not forget, it was 6 seasons at United, and also he was played in a number of different formations and a number of different positions. He had ample time to prove himself. And I think I found the correct conclusion here. I think I know what the answer is. Go back and look at that Juventus side. Go back to the point in the video where I was listing all of those names. Look at the players he plays alongside for France. Look at how many captains, leaders there are in those sides. At Juventus, it's Buffon, it's Chiellini, Bonucci, Barzagli, Marchisio, Pirlo, Vidal, Evra, Lichtsteiner. And for France, he plays alongside Kante, who especially at the World Cup essentially occupied 2 players. He was as good as 2 players. At Juventus, those players were all in their late 20s or 30s. They were one of the best defensive units in the world at that point. They were the bedrock for all of Juventus's Serie A wins, and it must have been a dream scenario as a midfielder to be able to play in front of that back 4 or back 3, back 5, and goalkeeper, and also to have those midfield partners, because you know how protected you are, and you know that even if you make a mistake, you got Chiellini and Bonucci and Barzagli and Buffon behind you, and you've got Marchisio and Vidal or Pirlo next to you. And also something not really touched on enough is that Serie A probably helped protect Pogba as well, because it's a much slower paced league than the Premier League. He'd have more time on the ball to play his game, to ping those long passes, to look and assess the situation. And even at international level, in general, international football is played at a much slower pace. That's the Juventus and France situation. Experienced, knowledgeable captains, leaders who he's been playing alongside, or players who basically take all of the defensive responsibility of 2 players in 1 player. And compare that to the situation at Manchester United. Who has been protecting Pogba at Manchester United? It's an aging Matic. It's Fred. It's Herrera, it's McTominay, it's Fellaini. It's a consistently poor, weak back 4. United struggled, and so has Pogba. And on the surface level, you might conclude, well, United struggled, Pogba struggled, therefore it's United's problem, not Pogba's. But I'd actually say, if you are such a good player, and if you were being touted as, you know, the next Zidane, Yaya Toure, being compared to De Bruyne or whatever, then you should be good enough to be able to play in a situation where you aren't necessarily offered supreme protection. Because how good can a player possibly be if the only way they're able to succeed on the pitch is if they're protected by other players, by players who have much more experience, leadership, nous, knowledge? How good can that player be if he has to have this huge support network around him? Pogba can't play well, it seems, unless he's got Kante next to him, unless he's got Marchisio and Vidal and or Pirlo next to him, unless he's got Bonucci, Barzagli, Buffon, Chiellini behind him, unless he's got an informed Varane and Umtiti and Lloris behind him. How good is he really? It's got to come to a point where you can't just keep having your hand held. You've got to be able to take some accountability. And another thing is that especially in like the early to mid days of Pogba at United, I always heard from people who kept defending Pogba that, oh, well, he's not being played in his correct position. It's not the right formation. He needs to be played like this and da da da. What even is Pogba's best position? As I said before at the start of the video, what is Paul Pogba? He seems to have been played in every single position, formation under the sun. He's played in a double pivot in a 4-2-3-1. He's played as the lone defensive midfielder in a 4-3-3. He's played on the right of a midfield three in a 4-3-3. He's played on the left of a midfield three in a 4-3-3. He's played on the left of midfield in a 4-2-3-1. He's been given ample opportunity to nail down what his position is. This is very Theo Walcott. I'm going to compare him to Theo Walcott. This is all very Theo Walcott system. There was a time when it was like, what is his best position? Is he a winger? Is he an out-and-out striker? And it's the same thing with Pogba. It's like we should know his best position by now. We should know, and yet we don't, because it's the inconsistency of the player. 6 seasons at United, multiple positions, multiple formations. You should be able to nail down what is your best position and formation. He's never fully settled, and this is modern football. You're expected to be able to play a number of different positions. It's not good enough to be like, well, especially if you're more midfield or offensive player, you're expected to be able to play in multiple roles, multiple formations, multiple styles. It's not good enough to say, well, I've got to play on the left central midfield side in a box-to-box 4-3-3. No! And I'm going to compare him to KDB one more time. The reason being, doesn't matter they're not the same player right now. The reason being is, at the time, they were compared, rightly or wrongly, and a lot of people said Pogba was the better player, so it is fair to compare them now. De Bruyne has played and excelled as an out-and-out striker, as a second striker, as a false 9, as an out-and-out number 10, on the right of midfield in a midfield 4. Pep Guardiola has invented a new position for him in the free 8 role. He's played as a more dynamic box-to-box player. He's even played sometimes in a double pivot. Numerous formations with differing personnel for different clubs and also at international level. So that's De Bruyne, but with Pogba, it's like you've got to have the perfect number of midfield partners. It's got to be the perfect formation. He's got to have the right manager. He's got to have the right coach. He's got to have the right nutrition. He's got to have the right food. He's got to have the right training boots. There's got to be a solar eclipse and the stars have to align before he drops a few good performances a season for United. People like to say, well, on his day he's a world-class player. Yeah, well, my response is always, his day is the 30th of February. It just never comes. And when it does come, it's far too inconsistent. So to conclude, what is Paul Pogba? He is a good player who could be a great player in the correct circumstances. But he will never be a world-class player, nor will he ever reach the heights he could have and should have done. People might say he's a victim of circumstance and expectation, but it was his choice and his decision to go to United when he knew full well that club was a shambles. They didn't even have Champions League football when he joined them. He's not been able to find a way to bring his Juve form over to United, and as we've discussed, his Juve form, whilst good, was still overrated. And in my opinion, it's his own fault that he hasn't been able to play in a position or formation where he isn't offered supreme protection at all times. And also, he hasn't helped matters at all by consistently leaking to the press, basically, since like his 3rd or 4th season at United, that he wants out of the club. He's 29 years old now, and it's going to sound harsh, but he has wasted his prime years at club level. He's always going to do well with France. France are a very good side. It offers him more protection. He's now leaving United on a free, not sure exactly where he's going to go, probably Juventus. He's got one more chance to prove me wrong, I think. But based on what we've seen, I don't see that happening at all. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes to Juventus and he rediscovers his Juventus form. But he'll never reach the heights he could have and should have done. He'll never be a world-class player. He will never be the level of Kevin De Bruyne. And that's his own fault. And that is the Paul Pogba problem. Hope you enjoyed the video. Do make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you enjoyed it. If you didn't enjoy it, then click the dislike button twice. I'll see you next time.